Hey everyone, it's Tobes, and welcome to your second monitor. Today is the first video in our series of Spider-Man Commander deck techs. The Spider-Man set has a huge number of legendary creatures, so I wanted to showcase some of the coolest Commander options among them. I'm releasing a new Spider-Man Commander deck every Thursday through mid-November when the Avatar set drops, in addition to my usual Monday Commander deck tech videos. So if you have a request for a specific Spider-Man Commander you'd like to see me build, or a way you want to see me build them, let me know in the comments below. As you see, today our commander is Miles Morales. Miles is the second person to fight crime as Spider-Man in his original Ultimate universe, after Ultimate Peter Parker dies in the Death of Spider-Man storyline. Beyond the usual Spider-Man powers, Miles is also able to camouflage himself and paralyze opponents with a bioelectric burst he calls his Venom Strike. Ugh, no relation. My first real introduction to Miles was through the Spider-Verse movies, so if that's how you know him too, then you'll be able to follow this video just fine. But before we get into the deck tech, let's go over my deck building template. I like to build around my commander. I wouldn't put them in the command zone if I didn't think they were cool and I didn't want to show them off, so I put 30 cards toward my game plan. It's what my commander leads me to do and how we try to win. 30 more cards go towards supporting that game plan in the form of these three categories: card advantage, acceleration, and interaction. We usually run one or two Wraths. Sometimes we'll do a little bit more if it would feed into the game plan. Sometimes, like today, we do none because we're running a lot of creatures and we want to keep them if we can. And I almost always keep my floor of 38 lands because I want to be able to make sure I have enough mana to be able to cast my spells and play the game. So let's talk about our commander. Miles Morales is 1 and a green for a 1/2 legendary human citizen hero. That says when Miles enters, we put a +1/+1 counter on each of up to 2 target creatures, and for 3, a red, a green, and a white, we can transform Miles as a sorcery. Miles is one of the first transforming and modal double-faced cards, so we can play Miles as a 2-drop and pay this to transform him, or we can simply pay this amount and play him as his backside, Ultimate Spider-Man. Same cost as the transforming cost. Ultimate Spider-Man is a 4/3 legendary spider-human hero with First Strike and Haste, and has 2 other abilities. The first is Camouflage. For 2 generic mana, we can put a 1/1 counter on Ultimate Spider-Man, and he gains Hexproof and becomes colorless until end of turn. This is Miles going invisible. And whenever we attack, we double the number of each kind of counter on each spider and legendary creature we control. So again, we can play Miles as Miles, or we can play Miles as Ultimate Spider-Man, just depending on what we want to spend on his casting cost. And if we play him as Miles, we will get this enters trigger, and we can then spend the same casting cost for the backside to transform Miles at sorcery speed. I mentioned that I learned about Miles Morales from the Spider-Verse movies. At the end of Into the Spider-Verse, the first movie, Miles has come into his own. He's finally found his confidence both in his powers and in himself, and he's accepted the new duality of his life. He understands how he fits in, something he'd struggled with from the start. This is honestly an excellent metaphor for getting into Magic. For as great a game as this is, I've met more than my share of people who are intimidated by it. There's a lot to take in, between the breadth of the card pools and the way the mechanics interact, and something as simple as learning the steps and phases can feel like a little much. The ceiling for mastery is high, and while the culture isn't unwelcoming, it can seem impermeable. The jargon that experienced players use with each other can be just as daunting as the rules themselves. Joining the gathering isn't always easy. But maybe someone steps up to help. It could be an acquaintance who already plays, or a friendly employee at your local game store, or an established player with the soul of a shepherd who strikes up a conversation and invites you to pull up a chair. It doesn't take long to learn the basics of the game, and soon you're figuring out what about Magic appeals to you. Some people love competitive play, or uncovering cool card interactions, or just seeing big monsters battle it out in the middle of the board. Maybe you're swept away by the art and the stories behind the cards, or maybe you notice how elegant the rules themselves are and how they make this the best game in the world. Magic is rich, and the options are endless. And none of this happens in a vacuum. There are always other players, and each match means a single-serving friend at worst and the start of something wonderful at best. Someone asks if you're willing to trade cards with them, or if you need a token they opened. You're invited to play Commander or to draft on Friday nights. Before you know it, you're part of something bigger than yourself, a community that's decades old and growing bigger and wiser every year. You're no longer on the outside. You're a Magic player. At the end of Into the Spider-Verse, Miles tells us how this feels. Anyone can wear the mask, he says. You could wear the mask. If you didn't know that before, I hope you do now. You'll enjoy this deck if you came to Magic through your love of Spider-Man and you want to learn how well they go together, or if you like watching your team get stronger with every new creature you add to the web. So as usual, this Moxfield page with the deck list is listed in the video's description below. At the bottom of the deck list, right below where the cards I've chosen are, is a considering section. It includes a lot of other cards that I considered, but ended up not putting in the deck. If you have a bigger or a smaller budget for this deck, maybe take a look there first for ideas for how you can build toward this same idea, or maybe juke into a different direction. So we're going to start with our game plan, as usual. The game plan includes a couple of different things. Because Miles cares about counters, both on his front side and on his back side, we have a lot of cards that care about counters. Miles even puts counters on himself and can protect himself, which is great. So what we focused on was those counters, being able to put them on creatures or have cards that care about putting counters on creatures, as well as we have spiders and we have legendary creatures. That's the direction I took this. So we have a lot of spiders, a lot more legends, and almost all of these things care about counters. So we're going to start by talking about the legends first. These are all cards that either are legendary creatures or care about legendary creatures. We're going to start with Mikaeus the Lunarch. Mikaeus is a 0/0 legendary human cleric for X and a white. If you're new to Magic, X and a white means you spend a white mana and any number of other mana, and that defines what X is. And Mikaeus will enter with a number of 1/1 counters on it equal to whatever X was that you paid. And then, once Mikaeus no longer has Summoning Sickness, you can activate one of his other abilities. You can either tap him to put a 1/1 counter on him, or you can tap him and remove a counter from him to put a 1/1 counter on each other creature you control. That's every creature except Mikaeus. So Mikaeus is a great way to pump a lot of mana into him and then pump up the entire team by taking those counters off. Just make sure that if you take the last counter off, you remember that Mikaeus will die from not having those counters on him. Next we have a Saga. This is Origin of Spider-Man. Since this is the Spider-Man I wanted to build, we've got to make sure we know how he got here, even though I don't think pictured is Miles. So Origin of Spider-Man is an enchantment, it's a saga, and it costs 1 and a white. When it comes in, it'll get a lore counter, and the first chapter will trigger. At the start of your pre-combat main phase, which is to say after you draw your card for every turn, you'll put another counter on it and its second ability will trigger. And after its third ability has triggered and resolved, you will sacrifice Origin of Spider-Man. It just goes to the graveyard. So, first chapter is we make a 2/1 green spider creature token with reach. We get a free creature. I guess it's not free, we're paying for the saga, but 1 and a white gets us a 2/1 green spider creature token with reach. The second chapter is put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. It could be that spider, or it could be something else. And whatever you put the counter on becomes a legendary spider hero in addition to its other types. Which means if we were to put it on, let's say Mikaeus would be a legendary human cleric spider hero. It's a lot going on, but he's allowed to have all of those types because they're sort of like tags for the cards. Finally, the third chapter is target creature you control gains double strike until end of turn. That seems pretty strong. We can even put that on our commander, who already has first strike on his backside, and he'll have double strike, which sort of overlaps. So yeah, Origins of Spider-Man is a great way for us to make one of our creatures legendary, even if that creature is just the 2/1 spider token. It would of course become a 3/2 spider token with that counter on it. Next, a rad card, Spider Punk. 1 and a red for a 2/1 legendary spider human hero with Riot, which means it comes in with a 1/1 counter, or if not, it comes in and has haste. Spider Punk says other spiders you control have Riot, which means those spiders, whenever they enter the battlefield, are going to come in either with a +1/+1 counter or with haste. We get to choose when they come in. Spider-Punk also says spells and abilities can't be countered and damage can't be prevented. That does not mean spells and abilities we control or our opponents control. It means both. No spells can be countered, no abilities can be countered, and no damage, no matter who's directing it or who it's directed at, or what it's directed at, can be prevented. Spider-Punk stops all of that. This is notable because some spells, or rather some permanents, have Ward. Ward is a triggered ability that says when a spell or ability controlled by an opponent targets this permanent, you have to pay the ward cost or it would counter that spell or ability. With Spider-Punk in play, ward will still trigger, but we don't have to pay the ward, because if we don't pay the ward, it says, oh, counter that spell or ability, but it can't be countered and can't always wins. So yeah, Spider-Punk is a nice 2/1 with cool abilities that can give all of our creatures 1/1 counters, which is what we care most about in this deck. Next is Arania, Heart of the Spider. I don't know this character. I'm not a big Spider-Man person, but I'm excited to see all of these new friends. For 1, a red and a white, we get a 3/3 legendary spider-human hero that says when we attack, put a +1/+1 counter on target attacking creature. That doesn't say when we attack with Arania. So as long as Arania is on the battlefield, any creatures we attack with trigger this ability, and we get to put a counter on one of the creatures that is attacking. And whenever a modified creature we control deals combat damage to a player, we exile the top card of our library, and we may play that card this turn. Modified means a creature that has a counter on it of any sort, that has equipment attached to it, or that has an aura that we control attached to it. I don't believe we have any auras in this deck, so modified in this case is generally going to be looking at what creatures have counters on them. And this is called Impulse Draw. It means we're not drawing this card into our hand, we're exiling it face up, and it's in the exile zone, but we have special permission to play it this turn if we want to. The fact that it uses the word play rather than cast means if it's a land and we have not made our land drop for the turn, we can play that land as our land drop. And if it's a spell, we can cast that spell. So yeah, this will trigger for each modified creature that deals combat damage to a player. It doesn't trigger, of course, for modified creatures we control that deal combat damage to creatures or to planeswalkers. Only other players. So next is Arwen, Weaver of Hope, from the Lord of the Rings Commander product. Arwen is 1 double green for a 2/1 legendary elf noble. Arwen says each other creature we control enters with a number of additional +1/+1 counters on it equal to Arwen's toughness. So Arwen is a 2/1, so her toughness is 1. So with Arwen in play, all of our creatures come in with a +1/+1 counter on it. But if we were to put counters on Arwen, they would raise Arwen's power and toughness, and now we have creatures coming in with even more +1/+1 counters thanks to Arwen's toughness being higher. So a nice legend that we can pump up and that pumps up all of our creatures that subsequently come into play. Krenko, 10 Street Kingpin, really fun in this deck. Krenko is a 1/2 legendary goblin for 2 and a red that says whenever Krenko attacks, you put a +1/+1 counter on it, and then you make a number of 1/1 red goblin creature tokens equal to Krenko's power. So the first time Krenko attacks, assuming he's still a 1/2, he'll get a counter, becoming a 2/3, and we'll make 2 of these 1/1 goblins. If we put more counters on Krenko, which is probably a good idea for us, we're not going to just get a bigger and bigger Krenko, we're going to get a lot more goblins. And those goblins can also get counters and become bigger and bigger and bigger. It might be a good idea, if you're playing this deck in paper, to get some dice. Get a lot of dice, because we're going to be putting counters on a lot of things. Krenko seems like a lot of fun. Next, we have Kutzil, Malamut Exemplar. Kutzil is a 3/3 legendary cat warrior for 1, a green, and a white that says your opponents can't cast spells during your turn. They just can't. Sorry, that protects us a little bit. And whenever 1 or more creatures we control, each with power greater than its base power, deals combat damage to a player, draw a card. So what that means is any of our creatures, when it deals damage to a combat damage to a player, if its power is higher than what's printed on its card, we draw a card off of that. Usually that means it's because it has counters on it. And that sounds pretty good to me. We're going to have plenty of counters, so I think Kutzil is going to be drawing us plenty of cards. Next up, from the Baldur's Gate set, we have Lae'zel, Valkith's champion. Forgive me, I haven't played Baldur's Gate, so if I have mispronounced these words, let me know in the comments below. For 2 and a white, we get a 3/3 legendary Gith warrior that says, if we would put one or more counters on a creature, or a planeswalker we control, or on ourselves, we put that many of each of those kinds of counters on that permanent or player instead. That many +1. Essentially, what Lae'zel says is every time we put counters on something that we control, we put an extra counter. And then Lae'zel has choose a background, which is not relevant in this deck. So Lae'zel doesn't put counters on things themselves? I don't know Lae'zel. But Lae'zel does make all of our counter putting effects a little bit better. Next up, we have Maester Seymour from the Final Fantasy Commander product. I also don't know Final Fantasy, so if I've gotten this wrong, again, tell me in the comments. 2 and a green for a legendary human elf cleric. Maester Seymour is a 1/3 that says at the beginning of combat on our turn, we put a number of 1/1 counters equal to Seymour's power on another creature we control. So we can't put them on Seymour himself, but if Seymour's power is higher, just like with Arwen, we'll be able to put more counters on things. In addition, Maester Seymour has, for 3 and double green, Monstrosity X, where X is the number of counters among creatures we control. So all the counters we have on all of our creatures, we total them up, and if we pay 3 and double green, we put that many counters on Maester Seymour, and Maester Seymour is now monstrous. What that means is we can only do this once, because once a creature is monstrous, it can't become monstrous again. So waiting to do this might be useful to us, but sometimes it's just worth doing in the middle of things. It does not say we only can do this as a sorcery either. So maybe Seymour is still a 1/3, but we have like 10 counters among creatures we control. We attack with Seymour, maybe our opponent blocks with their big creature, and we pay the 3 and double green to make it monstrous, which is to say to put 10 counters on it, and it becomes an 11/13. That seems fun. And then at the beginning of combat on our turn, we'll be able to put 11 counters on another creature we control for next turn. Next up, we have Rishgar, Pima Renegade, a classic for counters decks, but also particularly good for a few reasons in our deck. Rishgar is 2 and a green for a 2/2 legendary elf druid that says when Rishgar enters, put a 1/1 counter on each of up to 2 target creatures. So we just get 2 free counters, and one of those creatures can be Rishgar. But it does say a 1/1 counter on up to each of 2 target creatures. That means we can't put both counters on the same creature. Rishgar also says each creature we control with a counter on it can tap for green mana. So we can tap our creatures, make green mana as long as they have counters on them. Why that's helpful in this deck is because of web slinging. We're going to look at web slinging right now with Ben Riley. So Scarlet Spider, Ben Riley, is a 4/3 legendary human spider hero for 1, a red and a green. Ben has Trample, and Ben has Sensational Save. If Scarlet Spider was cast using web slinging, he enters with a number of 1/1 counters on him equal to the mana value of the returned creature. What does that mean? Well, Ben has web slinging for red and a green, which means instead of paying 1 a red and a green, we can cast Ben for the cost of a red and a green and returning a tapped creature we control to its owner's hand. So as long as we have a tapped creature, we can bounce that creature back to our hand and pay 1 mana less to web sling Ben in. And when we do that, he'll enter with a number of 1/1 counters on him equal to the mana value of the tapped creature that we bounced to our hand. So how do we get our creatures tapped? Well, attacking with them sure works well, but we have Rishgar, and Rishgar can make our creatures just tap for mana, which means if we have a big creature with a counter on it, we can tap that creature for a green mana, then bounce that creature by web slinging Ben in. And all we have to do is pay a red and the green we just tapped the creature for. And Ben will get a number of counters equal to the mana value of the creature that we bounced. So that seems pretty good. Next up, we have Trommel, Seymour's Butler, another Final Fantasy Commander card. 2 and a green for a legendary elf advisor that says each other non-token creature you control enters with an additional +1/+1 counter on it. Just another way for us to get counters on our creatures the moment they come in. And Trommel says for a single generic mana and tap, we can proliferate X times, where X is the number of non-token creatures we control that entered this turn. Proliferate means we choose any number of permanents or players and give each of those permanents and players one more of every type of counter that they have on them. So for our board, we look at all of our creatures that have +1/+1 counters, and we add an extra +1/+1 counter for each time we proliferate. And this is just proliferate for the number of creatures you've had come in that are not tokens. So if we've had 2 creatures enter the battlefield, we can then pay 1 and tap Trommel to proliferate X times. X being 2. That just means we put 2 extra counters on everything. That seems pretty useful. And the fact that it's repeatable is very strong. Next up, we have Arasta of the Endless Web, a card I really love, and it's an interesting card because it's a spider that's not from the Spider-Man set. Arasta is 2 and double green for a 3/5 legendary enchantment creature spider that has reach. And whenever an opponent casts an instant or sorcery spell, we make a 1/2 green spider creature token with reach. So we're making little spiders, they all have reach so they can block flyers, and we're paying attention on our opponent's turns, and of course on our turn, because anytime any opponent casts an instant or sorcery, doesn't have to be on their turn or on our turn. Every time that happens, we make a little spider friend. And Arasta is a pretty good blocker for us as well. We can put counters on Arasta, we can put counters on the spider creature tokens, and we ought to, because then we can get more counters on them thanks to our commander's backside, Ultimate Spider-Man's triggered ability. Next up we have Bright Palm, Soul Awakener, from the March of the Machine Commander decks. I think this was the face commander for this deck. For 1, a red, a green, and a white, we get a legendary Fox Shaman with Backup 1. Backup means when this creature enters, we can either put a +1/+1 counter on it or on any other creature we control, and if we choose a different creature, then that creature gets Bright Palm's other ability until end of turn. Either way, Bright Palm has this ability all the time, which is to say, whenever this creature attacks, double the number of +1/+1 counters on target creature. It could be the same one. And that creature, the one that we targeted, that we doubled the counters on, can't be blocked by creatures with power 2 or less this turn. So it can only be blocked by big things, really. Otherwise, Bright Palm is a 4/3, and that seems pretty good. Of course, if Bright Palm comes in and we back up onto itself, it's a 5/4. It seems lots of fun. Next up is Helena and Elena Partners. I have another deck in my channel where Helena and Elena are partners with the Gay Kings. So if you want to check out my Pride decks, you should be able to find that playlist in my channel pretty easily. In any case, Helena and Elena Partners is 2, a red and a green, for a 2/3 legendary human ranger with first strike and reach that says at the beginning of combat on our turn, we put a number of 1/1 counters on another target creature we control equal to Helena and Elena's power. That creature gains haste until end of turn. So if Helena and Elena have a higher power, let's say because maybe because we've put counters on them, they're going to be able to put even more of those counters on our other creatures. And each time they do, that creature's going to get haste. So this is a great, again, repeatable way for us to put counters on our other creatures. We just want to remember, we can't put Helena and Elena's counters on themselves. Next up, Silk, Web Weaver, is a 3/5 legendary spider human hero for 2, a green and a white, with web slinging. We've got another web slinger, 1, a green and a white, and bounce a tapped creature we control. Silk says whenever we cast a creature spell, any creature spell, we make a 1/1 green and white human citizen creature token, which means we get a free citizen every time we cast any creature, including our commander, The only one this doesn't work on is Silk themselves, because Silk has to be on the battlefield, which means already cast, in order for this to trigger. As you'll note, we are running 33 creatures in our deck, including our commander. So this could trigger on 32 other creatures, or more, because with web slinging, we're able to bounce creatures back to our hand and recast them. In addition, Silk says for 3, a green, and a white, creatures we control get +2/+2 and gain vigilance until end of turn. Now, this is not counters. This is a static bonus that just lasts until end of turn. So this is not something we would want to represent with dice. We just want to know that we've activated this and add that in to our creature's power and toughnesses when we use it during combat. However, all those creatures gain vigilance, so probably a good idea to attack with them. Even if we only have Silk on the battlefield and we activate this, Silk becomes a 5/7 vigilance until end of turn. Seems pretty good. Next up, we have, I love Toski. Toski, Bearer of Secrets, originally from Kaldheim. Toski is 3 and a green for a 1/1 legendary squirrel that cannot be countered and is indestructible. Toski is very important in the Kaldheim storyline. Toski attacks each combat if able, which means we don't have a choice if when we go to combat, Toski is untapped and not prevented from attacking by something. We have to declare Toski as an attacker. But we don't have to worry about him dying because Toski's indestructible. And Toski says whenever a creature we control deals combat damage to a player, we draw a card. So Toski is free card advantage for us whenever any of our creatures end up dealing combat damage to one of our opponents. Yeah, just a good squirrel. Next, we have another Final Fantasy Commander card. It's Waka, Devoted Guardian. Waka is a 4/4 legendary human warrior for 2, a green and a white, with reach and trample. 4/4 for 4 with reach and trample, it's pretty good. It also says, whenever Waka deals combat damage to a player, destroy up to 1 target artifact that player controls, and put a +1/+1 counter on Waka. So this happens after combat damage, so Waka doesn't do 5 damage, she'll do 4 initially, and then 5 after the first time it's triggered. But whatever player he has damaged, we're going to be able to destroy one of their artifacts. That seems pretty good. In addition, Waka is apparently the Blitzball captain. At the beginning of our end step, if a counter was put on Waka this turn, we put a +1/+1 counter on each other creature we control. So that 1/1 counter that was put on Waka can be the one that Waka's other ability puts on him. It could be one of the many other sources we have for putting counters on our creatures. All that matters is, at the beginning of our end step, if a counter was put on Waka from anywhere, then all of our creatures get an extra +1/+1 counter. All of our creatures, rather, other than Waka themselves. Next, we have Ghost Spider, Gwen Stacy. Gwen Stacy is 3 and double red for a 4/4 legendary spider human hero with menace. So can't be blocked by only one creature, has to be multi-blocked. And whenever Ghost Spider attacks, she deals X damage to the defending player, where X is the number of attacking creatures. So this version of Gwen Stacy makes us want to attack with lots of creatures. Luckily, we're going to have plenty of creatures. And she's protected a little bit by the fact that she can't be blocked if our opponent only has one creature. And if our opponent has more than one creature, if she's going to trade, she's probably going to trade pretty highly because she's a 4/4. So that damage does have to go to the defending player, however. We can't shoot one of our opponent's defending creatures. Next, we have Halia, Ascendant Cadet, from Edge of Eternities, the set that just came out right before Spider-Man. Really great set. 2, a green and double white for a legendary human soldier that is a 3/3. Halia, when they enter or attack, we put a 1/1 counter on a creature we control. It can be Halia. And then whenever one or more creatures we control with a +1/+1 counter on them deal combat damage to a player, we draw a card. Just another way for us to do damage and get cards out of it when we do. In addition, I do want to call out the fact that Halia puts a counter on a creature when she attacks, as well as when she enters. So every time Halia attacks, we're going to get an additional counter. So it might be a good idea to put that first enters counter on Halia herself, so that she's big enough for us to attack with her each time and continually get more 1/1 counters, either on herself or on something else. Next, we have Spider-Man Brooklyn Visionary, who I assume is Miles Morales again. 4 and a green gets us a 4/3 legendary Spider-Human hero with web slinging for 2 and a green. And when this Spider-Man enters, we search our library for a basic land card, put it on the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle. This effect is called Rampant Growth. Search your library for a basic land, put it on the battlefield tapped, and shuffle. Sometimes it comes up on other cards, so that's why we've sort of shorthanded it to Rampant Growth. It's also worth noting that it says when Spider-Man enters, the rule in Magic is whenever a card refers to itself, it means this card. It doesn't mean a different Spider-Man. So if we have this card in play, Spider-Man Brooklyn Visionary, and we play Miles Morales, or we play Ultimate Spider-Man, this ability will not trigger. This only triggers when this card enters the battlefield. Just to be clear. Next we have Spider-Man India. I think this card is really cool. This card and where's the other one? Silk Webweaver, both really cool cards that I think work really well together. Spider-Man India is 3 a green and a white for a 4/4 legendary Spider-Human hero with, again, web slinging for 1 a green and a white that has Pavtir's Seva? Forgive me. Whoever knows how to pronounce this, let me know in the comments. I will praise you for it. It says, whenever we cast a creature spell, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature we control, and it gains flying until end of turn. So, just like Silk, it triggers whenever we cast a creature spell. Spider-Man India is not just rewarding us with citizen tokens, it's rewarding us with counters that we can put on our creatures, and until end of turn, the creatures that get those counters gain flying. So, this kind of evasion ability lets us it gives us a better way to attack our opponents without being worried about having them block us. Which means if we put it on something like a creature we have while Halia's in play, we're going to probably be more easily able to deal combat damage to our opponent and draw cards from it. Spider-Man India, I want to make mention though, will put a counter on the creature, and the creature will gain flying until end of turn, but the counter remains on it. That's how counters work in Magic. If the card wanted to give a creature a temporary stat boost, it would say that creature gets +1/+1 until end of turn. If it's a counter, the counter remains no matter what. Next up, we have Burke, Long Ear of the Law, from Bloomborough. For 4 a green and a white, we get a 4/4 legendary rabbit soldier with vigilance that says when Burke enters, we put a +1/+1 counter on each of up to 2 target creatures. It doesn't say other creatures, so we can put the counter on Burke if we want to. And whenever a creature we control with a +1/+1 counter on it attacks, double the number of counters on it. That's very strong. It is a 6-mana card, but just being able to see that most of our cards are going to end up with +1/+1 counters on them, when we attack with them, we just double up the number of counters. Probably you see why I suggested get a lot of dice if you're going to play this in paper. Then we have Hamza, Guardian of Arashan. Hamza is 4 a green and a white for a 5/5 legendary Elephant Warrior that says this spell costs a generic mana less to cast for each creature we control with a +1/+1 counter on it. That's not the number of counters we have, that's each creature with any number of 1/1 counters on it. Any number, of course, being at least 1. And all of our creature spells have that same ability, that same cost reduction. So Hamza is a cheaper spell based on if we already have creatures with counters on them, and Hamza, while in play, makes our creatures cheaper for those counters. That even counts if, once Hamza is in play, we put counters on Hamza, because Hamza is still a creature we control, and it would be one with a +1/+1 counter on it. So yeah, good acceleration for us. The last card in this section is Spider-Man, Miles Morales. As you can see, this is another Spider-Man, but it is also Miles Morales again, but it's different from the other two, from the other Spider-Man we've seen and from Miles Morales himself. This is 4 and double green for a 5/5 legendary Spider-Human hero with Vigilance and Trample And whenever this Spider-Man enters or attacks, we put a +1/+1 counter on each other creature we control. So every creature we have except for this one. And those creatures gain trample until end of turn. So Spider-Man Miles Morales already has trample and is already a 5/5, so pretty good. We can put counters on him, but this ability puts counters on all of our other creatures. And that happens whenever he enters or attacks. So playing him as a 6 mana, put a counter on all of your other creatures and they have trample until end of turn is pretty good on its own. And then on subsequent turns, it'll happen again every time he attacks as well with trample and with vigilance. So that is our Legends section. Let's take a look at our Spiders section. Many of these we've already seen. For example, Origin of Spider-Man, Spider-Punk, Aranya, Scarlet Spider, Arasta. These are all spiders already, but they are legendary, or at least Origin of Spider-Man makes a spider and then we can make something legendary. We're looking at other spiders as well, because we want to remember our commander cares about, on this backside, we double the number of counters of each, double the number of each kind of counter on each spider and legendary creature. It's not legendary spiders, it's both categories, legendary creatures and spiders. So we have a few spiders that aren't legendary. For example, Radioactive Spider. For a single green, we get a 1/1 spider with reach and death touch that has the Fateful Bite ability. For 2 generic mana, and sacrificing the Radioactive Spider, we can search our library for a Spider Hero card, reveal it, put it into our hand, shuffle, but only as a sorcery. What that means is any card that has both the Spider type and the Hero type is a valid target for Radioactive Spider. For example, whatever we put our +1/+1 counter on from Chapter 2 of Origin of Spider-Man becomes a Spider Hero in addition to its other types, so Radioactive Spider could find that if it were still in our library. But for example, Spider-Punk is a Spider Human Hero. That is a spider and a hero, so it is a Spider Hero, so it's a valid target for Radioactive Spider. Twitching Doll, on the other hand, is a Spider Toy, so Radioactive Spider cannot find it. Make sense? If not, ask me in the comments and I will be happy to clarify. We've seen Spider-Punk, we haven't seen Twitching Doll, and we kind of don't want to. But yeah, Twitching Doll is from Duskmourn, the modern horror set that came out last year. For 1 and a green, we get a 2/2 artifact creature spider toy that says tap to add 1 mana of any color and put a nest counter on this creature. Nest counters don't have an inherent rules meaning. It's just that the second ability of Nesting Doll cares about them. That second ability is tap and sacrifice this creature to make a 2/2 green spider creature token with reach for each counter on this creature, activate only as a sorcery. That's notable because nest counters don't do anything, but are counters. However, we can also put +1/+1 counters on this Twitching Doll. We just want to make sure that we don't confuse them by using like the same kind of dice to represent one type of counter and then the other type of counter. Just make sure you use different ones. But Twitching Doll only cares about the number of counters it has on it, not the type of counter. So as we make it bigger with +1/+1 counters, or as we tap it for mana and put nest counters on it, we're building up the number of 2/2 spiders in it. And whenever we want to, as long as it's untapped and it has no summoning sickness, we can tap it and sacrifice it to make all these little green spider tokens. So it is a 2/2 spider toy, and it can explode into a lot of other 2/2 spiders. Next, we have a classic instant called Arachnogenesis. This is a 2 and a green instant. We can cast it whenever we want. That says create X 1/2 green spider creature tokens with reach, the same kind of spider token that Arasta makes, where X is the number of creatures attacking us, and then prevent all combat damage that would be dealt this turn by non-spider creatures. So that means we don't want to cast Arachnogenesis anytime other than on our opponent's turn when they are attacking us. Because if they're attacking us with 3 creatures, Arachnogenesis will make 3 of these little spider tokens, because that's the number of creatures attacking us. If our opponent attacks us with 15 creatures, we make 15 little spiders. And we prevent all damage that would be dealt by any creature that doesn't have the spider type. So all of our little tokens will do damage. All of our creatures that we have that are spiders, like everything in this category, will do damage. Anything without the spider type will do no damage in combat this turn. So Arachnogenesis is a great way to suddenly explode the number of spiders we have and possibly kill our opponent's creatures when they don't expect it. We've seen Aranya and how Aranya is a spider, of course. Same thing is true of Scarlet Spider and Arasta. And actually, every other card in this section that we've already seen, Silk, Ghost Spider, Spider-Man Brooklyn Visionary, Spider-Man Miles Morales, and Spider-Man India, but we have two other cards that are special. We're going to talk about Web Warriors first. Web Warriors is a 4/3 spider hero for 4 and a green or white. So this is hybrid mana. You can use either white mana or green mana to pay that last pip. That says when this creature enters, put a +1/+1 counter on each other creature you control. It's another one of these effects. Because this is the team, all working together. So everyone is stronger as a whole. Finally, we have Maskwood Nexus, which is a little weird in this deck, but is a really great synergy piece. Maskwood Nexus is a 4 generic mana artifact that says creatures we control are every creature type. The same is true for creature spells we control and creature cards that we own that aren't on the battlefield. What that means is every creature we control is a spider, is a hero, is a villain, is an elf, is an ooze. Everything we control is the same creature type, which is to say everything we control is every creature type. This is good because Spider, our Ultimate Spider-Man, there you go, the backside of our commander, cares about legendary creatures, which is not a type, legendary is a super type, but cares about when spiders we control do the thing. When, here we go, why are we scrolling? When spiders we control attack. So when we attack, we double the number of each counter on each spider and each legendary creature we control. So it's actually not that we care about attacking with spiders, it's that we care about attacking at all with any number of creatures. As long as we attack with a single 1/2 spider token, all of our spiders and all of our legendary creatures will get the counters on them doubled. So this is a very powerful ability. It just only affects the counters on our spiders and the counters on our legendary creatures. So with Maskwood Nexus in play, Maskwood Nexus makes all of our creatures every creature type, which includes spider. So all of our non-spider creatures, even if they're not legendary, are going to have their counters doubled by our commander's backside, by Ultimate Spider-Man's trigger. That is a great way for us to put more and more and more counters on our things and not worry that they may happen not to be a legendary creature or a spider, even though most of our creatures are. In addition, on top of all that Maskwood Nexus is doing, we can pay 3 generic mana and tap it to make a blue 2/2 shapeshifter creature token with Changeling. A Changeling is every creature type, which means if we make one of these and then Maskwood Nexus is destroyed, so this effect is no longer in play, that shapeshifter, the 2/2 blue shapeshifter, will still be a spider because it has Changeling, so it is every creature type including spider. I thought Maskwood Nexus would be a great inclusion in this deck because it lets every one of our creatures be Spider-Man because anyone can wear the mask. So we've seen our legends, we've seen our spiders. Let's take one final look at the section of our game plan that is the biggest, which is counters. We've seen a bunch of these, but we're about to see a lot more. So Mikaeus, as we know, can put counters on itself and on our other creatures. Next up we have Requisition Raid. This is a sorcery from Outlaws of Thunder Junction that looks like it casts just one, or it costs just 1 white mana, but it has Spree, which means we have to choose at least 1 additional cost, and we can choose more if we want to. We can choose all of them if we like. For a generic mana, we can Spree into destroying an artifact. For a single generic mana, we can do the same for an enchantment, or a single generic mana can put a +1/+1 counter on each creature a player controls. We can target ourselves with that, and so for a single white and a generic, we can put a counter on all of our creatures. It is a sorcery, we can't do it during combat or on our opponent's turn, but we can sure do it before we attack, and that seems pretty good. But if we want to do that, it costs a white and 1 If we want to pay one more, we can blow up an enchantment, and one more beyond that, and an artifact. Those can be on different players' playmats. We can hit an artifact from player A and an enchantment from player B, put counters on all of our creatures, then we swing in maybe. Requisition Raid is very flexible in that way. And I want to make one more comment on this because there's a thing at commander tables called politics, which is to say you can make deals with people. This says put a +1/+1 counter on each creature target player controls. That doesn't have to be us. If we wanted, we could say, hey, player B, it looks like you are in a pretty dominant position, and you could easily come at me or either of the other two players. If I put a counter on all of your creatures, will you agree not to come at me? Or, hey, player B, it looks like player A is probably going to come at you in a moment. If you will be my ally, at least for a one turn cycle, I'll put a counter on all your creatures so that player A is either dissuaded from attacking you or is going to have to make some trades when they do. This isn't going to come up that often. Not everyone wants to make this kind of deal, or, well, it can also be the case that you don't want to make all of your opponent's creatures bigger. But as our creatures are getting bigger and bigger and bigger, this may prove not to be that big of a deal. And so the goodwill that we get from it, or the benefit of the deal, might be worth it. But even if not, we do it on our own creatures, and that's still a floor for how good this is. Next up is Bard class. This is a class enchantment for a red and a green. What that means is, when Bard class comes in, it has this first ability here. At sorcery speed, we can pay a red and a green to level it up to level 2, and now it has the first ability and the second ability. And once it's level 2 at sorcery speed, we can pay the cost here to level it up to level 3, and now it has all 3 abilities. So those abilities are, when it first comes in, legendary creatures we control enter with an additional +1/+1 counter on them. So once Bard class is in play, every time we cast a new legendary creature, or it enters somehow, it will come in with an extra 1/1 counter on it. This does not put 1/1 counters on any legendary creatures that are already in play, because they have already entered. But if they were to be bounced, let's say, by web slinging, and then we cast them again, they would come in with this extra counter on them. Level 2 is legendary spells we cast cost a red and a green less to cast. This effect only reduces the amount of colored mana you pay. So if we have a spell that costs 1, a green, and a white, with level 2 in effect, as long as that spell is legendary, it only costs 1 and a white, because it costs a green less to cast. If it cost 1, a red, and a green, it only costs that single 1 generic mana, again, assuming it's legendary, because this does not reduce the amount of colorless mana we pay, only if it has a single red pip or a single green pip. If it has any red or green pips, this will reduce one of each of those. As long as it's legendary. Just want to remind you, it's something that can be forgotten. Level 3 is whenever we cast a legendary spell, we exile the top 2 cards of our library, and we may play them this turn, which is that impulse draw that Aranya gave us earlier. But now it's 2 cards, so it's free card advantage just for casting legendary spells. Next up, we have Metastatic Evangel. Metastatic Evangel is a 3/1 Phyrexian human cleric for 1 and a white. That says whenever another non-token creature we control enters, we proliferate. Remember, proliferate means we look at the permanents that we have, or really any permanents on the board, on anywhere on the battlefield, on our opponent's playmats as well. And any one of them we choose, if it has counters on it, it gets 1 more of each type of counter it has. So proliferate is another nice way we can politic. We can say, well, I've got all my creatures and they all have counters on them, and I want to put more counters on them, so I'm going to proliferate those. But you look like you have something that has good counters on it as well. What will you do for me if I proliferate those counters on it? Or maybe one of our opponents has bad counters on one of their creatures. They have -1/-1 counters. Those exist as well. We might say, I want to proliferate that in order to possibly kill that creature. Or if you want to be a real jerk, you say, hey, I'm going to proliferate those -1/-1 counters unless you do something for me. So I don't think that Miles Morales would smile kindly on extortion, but you play the deck how you want to. Origins of Spider-Man, of course, can put a counter on a creature with its second chapter ability. Spectacular Tactics is another instant for 1 and a white that says we choose one. We can either put a 1/1 counter on a creature we control and it gains hexproof until end of turn, or we can destroy a creature with power 4 or greater. That could be our creature. I don't see why it would be, but this is a good way for us to kill a big creature of our opponents or protect a creature of ours while also putting a counter on it. Spider-Punk, of course, gives everything, all of our spiders riot, so they come in with an extra counter if we want, or they come in with haste. And remember, if Maskwood Nexus is in play and Spider-Punk is in play, all of our creatures that we're casting have riot because they're all spiders. We've seen Aranya, of course, already. Puts counters on a target attacking creature when we attack. Arwen has our creatures enter with counters equal to her toughness. Fight Rigging is next. From Streets of New Capenna, this is a great card. For 2 and a green, we have an enchantment with Hideaway 5, which means when it enters, we look at the top 5 cards of our library. One of them we will exile face down underneath Fight Rigging. You don't have to put it under Fight Rigging, but it's usually easier to indicate that Fight Rigging is what has exiled it. And then the other 4 that we looked at, we'll put on the bottom of our library in a random order. And then, at the beginning of combat on our turn, we put a 1/1 counter on one of our creatures. And if we then control a creature with power 7 or greater, we can play the card we exiled without paying its mana cost. So generally, when you hide away, you want to choose a spell and a powerful spell. Something that costs a lot of mana, if possible. Fight Rigging, at the beginning of combat on our turn, will always put a counter on things, even after we've cast the spell that Hideaway exiled. But if we can, we want to try and get a creature up to power 7 or greater as soon as we possibly can, because then we get to cast whatever we put under it with Hideaway. And getting a spell out earlier is better than getting a spell out later. However, we can use this ability to spread 1/1 counters around. Sometimes we want to do that because we have effects that double the counters on our creatures rather than putting extra counters on our creatures. So we want to have counters on those creatures to double. Fight Rigging is very flexible in this way, and it rewards us for having a really big thing. But even without that, if we're able to get this card that we hid away out early, that's probably pretty good. But we don't have to, and it can just sit on the battlefield, continually putting counters on things, and eventually surprise our opponents with something pretty big that we can play for free. Last thing, it says play, not cast, which means if we, for whatever reason, choose to hide away 5 and exile a land, whenever this all plays out, we put a counter on something, and then one of our creatures has power 7 or greater. If we haven't made a land drop, we can make that land drop right away as part of this resolution with the land that we hid away. That's not usually very good, but we can certainly do it if we maybe, do our Hideaway 5 and there's no spells on top. We'll just pick a good land. Next, we have Guy in the Chair. I associate this with the Spider-Man movies, the live-action movies, but the flavor text references Miles, so it's in the deck. For 2 and a green, we get a 2/3 Human Advisor that taps for 1 mana of any color. This is a great mana dork, just taps for us. And we can have web support. 2 and a green and tap to put a 1/1 counter on target spider as a sorcery. So if we don't need Guy in the Chair to tap for mana for us this turn, we can pump mana into him and put counters on our spiders. Seems good. Kapow is the next card. For 2 and a green, we have a sorcery that puts a +1/+1 counter on a creature we control, and then that creature fights a creature our opponent controls. Now, fight is different from the combat phase. It just means that you look at the power of each of those 2 creatures, ours and the one our opponent controls, and each of those creatures deal damage equal to their power to the other creature. So our creature's power has just gotten bigger from this counter, and its toughness has gotten bigger. So what we want to do, if we can, is choose one of our creatures, put a counter on it, and then choose a different creature that will die to our creature in the fight. So we want to use this as a removal spell, if we're able to. If we can't, it's okay to have them trade. We just want to make sure that we're not killing our creature in the process, because this is not an effect that only deals damage to our opponent's creature. We call those bites. This is a fight, so both creatures are going to take damage. Next up is Krenko. Of course, we've seen Krenko, and when Krenko attacks, Krenko gets counters. Lae'zel, when any of our creatures would get counters on it, it gets an extra counter. Master Seymour gives counters to a creature at the beginning of combat. Now we have Prowler, Misguided Mentor, which, spoilers, it's Miles Morales' uncle. Prowler is 2 and a green for a 3/3 legendary human rogue villain. This is the villain in our deck. You can't have a Spider-Man story without a villain in it. Prowler can't be blocked by creatures with power 2 or less, and whenever Prowler deals combat damage to a player, we put a 1/1 counter on another creature we control. So a very slow, but inexpensive and good on rate way to put additional counters on our creatures. And if our opponents don't have very strong creatures, Prowler is unblockable. Seems good. We've seen Rishkar, and Rishkar puts counters on creatures when it enters. Signature Slam is next. For 2 and a green, we have an instant that puts a 1/1 counter on a creature we control, and then each of our modified creatures deals damage equal to its power to a creature we don't control. This is a bite spell. It's not a fight in that all the creatures participating take damage. It's that only the creature we don't control is taking damage, and it's taking damage equal to the total power of each modified creature we control. Again, modified means it has an aura we control on it, it has an equipment attached to it, or it has counters on it. So this is Signature Slam is saying, we're going to put a 1/1 counter on one of our creatures, and even if that's the only creature we have with counters on it, that is a modified creature, so it's going to deal damage equal to its power to a creature we don't control. This is a great removal spell. Definitely a better removal spell, to be honest, than Kapow is, but Kapow's a Spider-Man card. You gotta play to the flavor sometimes. We've seen Trommel, and how Trommel has our non-token creatures enter with an extra counter on them. We've seen Bright Palm, and how it doubles the counters on a creature when it attacks. Helena and Elena, of course, put counters equal to its power on one of our creatures at the beginning of combat. Now we have the Earth Crystal from the Final Fantasy set. 2 and double green for a legendary artifact that says green spells we cast cost 1 generic mana less to cast. So it just reduces the generic mana cost by 1 on all of our green spells. It does not, however, reduce the green pips themselves, just the generic mana portion of it. The Earth Crystal also says, if 1 or more +1/+1 counters would be put on a creature we control, we instead put twice that many on it. And for 4 and double green and tap, we can put 2 counters on 1 or 2 creatures we control. That means 2 counters per creature. I'm sorry, it's distribute. I apologize. We can put 2 1/1 counters on a creature or 1 1/1 counter on each creature. That's what this ability says. However, it is modified by this ability here, which is what's called a replacement effect. So if we put a 1/1 counter on one of our creatures, that is doubled, and it gets 2 counters. If we put 2 counters on one of our creatures, it's doubled to 4. And if we put a 1/1 counter on each of 2 creatures, both of those are doubled, and each creature would end up with 2 1/1 counters on them. Now, I know what you're thinking. Does that mean this doubles all of the counters we're putting on things? It kind of does. So, for example, if Signature Slam, if we cast that while the Earth Crystal is in play, we're going to put a +1/+1 counter, which is doubled to 2 by the Earth Crystal. If Rishkar comes in and we put a 1/1 counter on each of up to 2 target creatures, that's going to be 2 counters on each of up to 2 target creatures. There are effects like Lae'zel, however. Lae'zel says if you would put counters on a creature, you put that many +1 instead. This is also a replacement effect. So what happens if, for example, we were casting Signature Slam to put a counter on a creature, but Lazel's in play, we would put 2 counters on, because Lazel adds an additional 1. If the Earth Crystal was in play, we would also put 2 counters on, because it's not adding 1, it's doubling it, but 1 doubled is 2. But what if the Earth Crystal and Lazel are both in play, and Signature Slam is what we're casting? We should put 1 counter on it, and we have to ask ourselves, what is being affected by this effect? Well, what's being affected is the creature we're targeting to put the counter on with Signature Slam. We control that creature, so we get to decide which order the replacement effects are applied in. So we could say it's 1 counter, we'll apply Lazel first, adding 1, and then the Earth Crystal, doubling it to 4. Because it's 1 plus 1 is 2, doubled is 4. Or we could apply it the other way. Signature Slam puts 1 on there, the Earth Crystal doubles that to 2, Lazel puts an extra 1, and now it's 3. We can generally look at it and say if the creature affected is our own, and in this deck, we're typically putting counters on our own creatures. You can read it in whichever order you want to get the best advantage, and you're allowed to do that. As long as the affected permanent is controlled by us, we get to decide the order of our replacement effects. So the Earth Crystal can really help us there. We want to be able to apply the adding tokens, the adding counters effect before we do the doubling counters effect, because that gets us more counters. So next up we have Venom Blast. It's that ability that we talked about Miles having. No, not that one. Venom Blast is 2 and double green for a sorcery that puts 2 +1/+1 counters on target creature we control. That's 2 counters on 1 creature. And then that creature deals damage equal to its power, to up to 1 other target creature. So we put 2 extra counters on one of our creatures, we look at its new power, and it does that much damage to another target creature. But I want to draw your attention to these words, up to. Magic uses this to mean, if we want, we don't have to do damage to anything else. It's okay to not do damage to anything. We can say up to, and we could say we'll choose 0 creatures. The reason we would do that is because if it said it deals damage equal to its power to 1 other target creature, the spell is only legal if it has legal targets. So it has to have a legal target for us to put these counters on, and it would have to have a legal target for us to have that first creature deal its damage to, except that it says up to here. So this can have 1 or 0 target creatures that are getting damage dealt to them, which means we can use Venom Blast if we want to simply put 2 counters on a creature we control, and then it doesn't have to do any damage to anything else. It's not forced to. We can choose up to 1 target creature to take that damage, or only 0, and just put the counters on it. Putting the counters on it only is a little less efficient. We probably want to be able to kill one of our opponent's creatures, but who knows? Maybe the only valid target we have on our opponent's boards is too big to kill with this anyway. So we might want to do the damage to it, or we might not. It's not going to matter either way, so we just choose not to. I just want to let you know that up to means you have the option to not do damage to another target creature. We've seen Waka and how Waka can put counters on all of our creatures. If Waka got a counter put on him, and that will trigger at the end step. Halia, of course, puts counters on creatures when Halia enters or attacks. Spider-Man India can put counters on our creatures whenever we cast a creature spell. Web Warriors puts a counter on all of our creatures when it enters. Burke puts counters on our creatures when it enters, and of course doubles those counters whenever the creature that has counters on it attacks. And finally, Spider-Man Miles Morales enters or attacks and puts a 1/1 counter on each other creature we control, also giving them trample. So that covers a lot of cards that feed into, our game plan. Let's now talk, before we get into supplementing that game plan, let's talk about supporting it in the form of card advantage, acceleration, and interaction, starting with card advantage. Now, I've called this section Draw just as a quick way to reference the fact that this is card advantage. Not all of these spells actually draw us cards. They just give us more cards than we might want, which we of course call card advantage. So Heroes Hangout is a great example of that principle. A single red mana for a sorcery that lets us choose either Date Night or Patrol Night. What great art. They're clearly like sideways, and this is, anyway, really great art. Date Night is exile the top 2 cards of your library, choose one of them. Until end of turn, you may play that card. So this is more impulse draw. It's not actually drawing the card because the card is not in your hand, it's in exile, and it's not hidden, it's public information. But this is just 1 mana to get the option to play one or two of the top cards of your library. And then whether we play that one or not, the other one's going to just remain in exile. Or if we want, this can be Patrol Night. 1 or 2 target creatures each get +1/+0 and gain first strike until end of turn. We can't really use this politically because it's a sorcery. We can't use it on, an opponent's turn to help their creatures. But we can sure give +1/+0 and first strike to 1 or 2 of our creatures. And that seems like a good way to either make them evasive or make them more likely to take creatures out if they do attack. Radioactive Spire, of course, if we pay 2 and sacrifice it, we can search our library for a Spider Hero. That's not us drawing a card, but it does put a card in our hand. Seems good. Stocking the Pantry from Bloombro is really great in this deck. For just a single green, we get an enchantment that says whenever we put 1 or more +1/+1 counters on a creature we control, put a supply counter on this enchantment. That means every instance of putting counters on a creature puts a counter on Stocking the Pantry, a supply counter. Supply counters don't mean anything specifically, they just are referred to by the second ability. But I want to call out 1 or more +1/+1 counters put on a creature we control. That means if we put 3 counters on our creature, we still just get 1 supply counter. But if we put a counter on each creature we control, then this will trigger on each creature, because it's 1 or more on a creature, not on creatures you control. So if we say we have an effect that puts a counter on 3 of our creatures, this will trigger 3 times and put a supply counter on Stocking the Pantry 3 times. So we'll have 3 counters. And then for 2 generic mana, we can remove a supply counter from Stocking the Pantry to draw a card. We can do that as many times as we want, as many times as we have supply counters on it. So as we put more and more counters on our creatures, we're going to be able to stock the pantry and get a lot more card draw. This is great, repeatable card advantage. We've seen Bard class and how Bard class can, when it's level 3, when we cast a legendary spell, we exile the top 2 cards of our library. We can play them this turn. That's Impulse Draw. Arania also gives us Impulse Draw whenever modified creatures we control deal combat damage to a player. We get the top card of our library into exile, and we can play it this turn. Fight Rigging, when we hide away 5, as its second ability resolves, if we have a creature with power of 7 or greater, we get to cast a spell or play a card that it exiled. There we go. Without paying its mana cost. Garruk's Uprising is a great card for this deck. For 2 and a green, we get an enchantment with 3 abilities, all of which are helpful. The middle one we'll look at first. Creatures we control have trample. They just have it. As long as Garruk's Uprising is on the battlefield and our creatures are also on the battlefield, they have trample. When Garruk's Uprising enters, if we control a creature with power 4 or greater, we draw a card. So it just replaces Garruk's Uprising in our hand. And whenever we have a creature with power 4 or greater enter while Garruk's Uprising is on the battlefield, we also draw a card. So this third ability is repeated card advantage. We just get every time we play a creature with power 4 or greater, we're going to be able to draw a card. Or if we have a creature that doesn't have power 4, but because of cards like Arwen, it enters with counters, or maybe Spider-Punk is letting it enter with counters because of Riot. If its power is 4 when it enters, then it's a creature with power 4 or greater that entered, and we draw a card off of that. Garruk's Uprising is going to give us a lot more than it looks like if you just look at the stats printed on the cards. Plus, trample, come on. We've seen Kutzil and how Kutzil says whenever our creatures that have power greater than their base power deal combat damage to a player, we draw a card. We have Toski, which says anytime any of our creatures deal combat damage to a player, we draw a card for each one of them. We have Halia, that has a similar effect to Kutzil, whenever one or more creatures we control with +1/+1 counters on them deal combat damage to a player, we draw a card. Now, we just talked about the difference between all these little details on stocking the pantry. One or more counters on a creature we control. There's a similar effect happening on Halia, because Halia says when one or more creatures we control with counters on them deal combat damage to a player, we draw a card. But it's to a player. So if we have one or more creatures deal combat damage to opponent A in a commander game, but we also attacked with some other creatures, and we attacked opponent B, if those creatures also deal damage to opponent B, we draw a second card, because we had creatures deal damage to opponent A and then to opponent B. It's not to any number of players or to opponents. So that would get us 2 card draws if we're doing damage to multiple different opponents, even if it only gets us 1 card, no matter how many creatures we had attack each opponent. Finally, we have Hero's Podium. Hero's Podium is 5 generic mana for a legendary artifact, so it is a legendary spell. It says each legendary creature we control gets +1/+1 for each other legendary creature we control. So if we have 3 legends, they're all getting +2/+2. This doesn't apply to all of our creatures if we have Masquerade Nexus in play, because legendary is not a creature type. It's a super type for the card. It doesn't make all of our creatures legendary, Masquerade Nexus that is. It just makes them all spiders, as far as we're concerned. However, Hero's Podium also says for X generic mana and tap, which is to say, again, we can pay as much as we wanted to X. We look at the top X cards of our library. We can reveal a legendary creature from among them, put it into our hand, and put the rest of them on the bottom of our library in a random order. So this is us just browsing. We get to put, let's say, 5 mana into this, tap it, we look at the top 5 cards of our library, and if there are any legendary creatures in it, we can put one of them in our hand. So repeated card draw again. Again, it's not actual draw, but it's card advantage. So that covers our card advantage section. Let's take a look at our acceleration section. Here we go. Sneaky. So again, this is acceleration. I just have it tagged as ramp to make it simple. So first is Soul Ring. If you don't know Soul Ring, you're about to get very familiar with it, because it's an incredibly powerful card, even though it seems simple. For 1 generic mana, it's an artifact that taps for 2 colorless mana. So you put 1 mana into it, and you immediately can tap it for 2, so you're already ahead. And then every other turn, you can keep tapping it for 2. Soul Ring is sort of the mascot card for the format of Commander. Everyone knows Soul Ring. It's really, really strong, even though it's very simple. It costs so little, you might as well put it in all of your decks. Arcane Signet is kind of a similar status, even though it's not as powerful. For 2 generic mana, we get an artifact that, if we tap it, we add 1 mana of any color in our commander's color identity. With Miles Morales, his color identity is Naya, which is white, red, and green. The reason we know that is because on his front face, and also on his back face, it makes it more obvious, but on his front face, we look at the color identity and we say it is equal to the number, or the different colors of pips on his card. So he's got green, he's got red, he's got green and white. So it's red, green, and white. And if we look at the back side, of course, it makes it even more obvious, red, green, and white. So Arcane Signet is going to tap for red or green or white. So it just fixes our mana, gives us exactly what we need for just 2 mana. And of course, it comes in and we can tap it right away. We've seen Bard class and how its second chapter ability, or its second level ability, makes our legends cost a red and a green less, but only the colored mana pips. That is acceleration. Felwar Stone is great in this deck. It's another 2 mana artifact that taps for mana. We call those mana rocks. So Felwar Stone is a 2 mana rock that taps for 1 mana of any color that a land an opponent controls could produce. So if our opponents have swamps in play, Felwar Stone can tap for black. If our opponents have all 5 colors in play, Felwar Stone can tap for all 5 colors. We can really only use it for either generic mana costs or costs that are white, red, or green, because those are the colors in our deck. But generally, Felwar Stone is going to tap for, if it doesn't tap for all of our colors, it'll probably tap for at least 2 of them, because we might have an opponent playing red and an opponent playing green, even if we have no one playing white or no one that has lands in play that produce white, at least for the moment. Being a 2-mana rock that taps for 2 of our colors and comes in untapped is also pretty good. We've seen Twitching Doll, and how Twitching Doll is a 2-mana creature, but once it has no summoning sickness, we can tap it for mana as well, so that's good acceleration. Chromatic Lantern is great for our deck. 3 generic mana for an artifact that taps for 1 mana of any color, but says all of our lands gain a new ability, which is tap to add 1 mana of any color. This essentially means all of our lands, when they are untapped, we can tap them for whatever color we want, irrespective of what they have printed on them. Because whatever they have printed on them, they still have those abilities. They just also have an additional ability to tap for 1 mana of any color. So Chromatic Lantern fixes our mana pretty universally and taps for mana itself. Cultivate is a terrific include here. You don't have to use this printing of Cultivate, but I sure do like it. These are from what's called the Strixhaven Mystical Archive. Cultivate is a sorcery for 2 and a green that lets us look through our library for 2 basic lands. One of them goes on the battlefield tapped, and the other one goes into our hand. Then we shuffle our library. So Cultivate, for 3 mana, finds us 2 basics. One of them just goes directly on the battlefield, albeit tapped, and the other one into our hand. If we haven't made our land drop, we can play that one in our hand right away, and it comes in untapped as usual. So yeah, Cultivate, 3 mana for 2 lands. Pretty alright. Guy in the Chair, as we've seen, can tap for 1 mana of any color. We next have Kami of Whispered Hopes, which maybe I shouldn't put it in all my counters decks. I think it belongs in all my counters decks though. So this is a 1/1 spirit for 2 and a green that says if 1 or more +1/+1 counters would be put on a permanent we control, that many +1 +1/+1 counters are put on that permanent instead. So similar to the effect we saw earlier on Lae'zel. But this only affects +1/+1 counters. In any case, it's another replacement effect that is going to give us more and more counters every time we have an effect that puts counters on things. In addition, Kami of Whispered Hopes can tap for an amount of mana of any one color equal to its power. So if the Kami is just a 1/1, it taps for 1 mana, but of any color. If we put counters on the Kami is going to tap for a lot more. But remember, if we put counters on the Kami, its replacement effect ability is also going to be affected. So if we have something that puts 1 counter on Kami of Whispered Hopes, we're going to put that counter +1 on it. So now we'll have 2 counters, and we can tap it for 3 mana, since its power will be 3. And that just gets bigger and better as the game goes on. This is a great source of lots and lots of mana. Next up, we have Relic of Legends. It's another mana rock. 3 generic mana for an artifact that taps for 1 mana of any color, but also lets us tap an untapped legendary creature we control to add 1 mana of any color. And this ability doesn't require us to tap the Relic. So we can tap the Relic for a mana, and then tap a legendary creature while the Relic is still tapped for another mana, and tap a second legendary creature for a 3rd mana, and we can keep going with that. That's not just good for us to accelerate ourselves, it also gives us tapped creatures that we can use web slinging to bounce and play the creature with web slinging for cheaper, using its web slinging cost. So this is a great way for us to take all of our many legends, tap them down without having to risk them by attacking with them, so that we can bounce them in order to get our web slinging creatures into play for cheaper. Similarly, Rishkar, of course, lets us tap our creatures for mana, for green mana that is, which, again, gives us the ability to web sling more easily. As does Supportive Parents. These are Miles Morales' parents. For 2 and a green, we get a 3/3 human citizen that says, tap 2 untapped creatures you control, add 1 mana of any color. It doesn't have to be creatures that no longer have summoning sickness. You can use this ability for creatures with summoning sickness, including Supportive Parents itself. We have to tap the Supportive Parents and some other creature because it's 2 creatures, and it's 2 creatures to add just 1 mana, but sometimes we need that extra mana, and we can use it for a web slinging a creature with web slinging in our hand. Besides, a 3/3 for 3 is just fine. And it's Miles' parents. You gotta have them here for the support. The Earth Crystal, as we've seen, makes our green spells cost a single generic mana less to cast. Spider-Man Brooklyn Visionary, when it enters, we Rampant Growth. We search for a basic, put it on the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle. And Hamza costs less for each of our creatures with 1/1 counters on it, and makes all of our other creatures cost less for each of the creatures we have in play with a 1/1 counter on it. So all of these accelerate us. Next, we have the interaction section, which again, I've just shorthanded as removal. We've talked about Requisition Raid and how it can blow up artifacts or enchantments. Now let's talk about Path to Exile and Swords to Plowshares. These are almost the same spell. They both cost a single white, they both are instants, and they both exile target creature. However, they both give the creature's controller a kickback. Swords to Plowshares gives that creature's controller life equal to the exiled creature's power. Path to Exile gives that creature's controller a chance to Rampant Growth. They may look through their library for a basic land, put it on the battlefield tapped, and shuffle. These are both extremely strong removal spells. Just 1 white mana, they can do it at instant speed, and they exile the creature, so there's no chance of it coming back. The controller gaining life is basically nothing compared to getting rid of a big, dangerous creature. And them getting a land, it comes in tapped, so that's better for them than gaining the life, but not much. Both are excellent spells for removal. Spectacular Tactics, of course, can also destroy a creature with power 4 or greater. Kapow is a fight spell. Signature Slam is a bite spell. Both of these can kill creatures. Web Up is a Spider-Man themed version of the card called Banishing Light. For 2 and a white, we have an enchantment that says when this enchantment enters, exile target non-land permanent an opponent controls until this enchantment leaves the battlefield. What that means is we will choose a non-land permanent an opponent controls, and we sort of tuck it under this card. And that card is now in exile and will remain there unless someone can remove Web Up. Maybe they use Requisition Raid to destroy an enchantment, and if they do, Web Up will leave the battlefield, and whatever creature they exiled, non-land permanent they exiled, will come back into play under its owner's control, because it was only exiled until Web Up leaves the battlefield. Still, 3 mana to hit basically anything and get rid of it until Web Up is gone, that's pretty alright. Annie Joins Up is next. Very cool card from Thunder Junction. For 1, a red, a green, and a white, we have a legendary enchantment that says when it enters, it deals 5 damage to target creature or planeswalker an opponent controls. So 5 damage doesn't necessarily kill everything, but it kills a lot of things. And we get that just for when Annie Joins Up enters. In addition, if a triggered ability of a legendary creature we control triggers, that ability triggers an additional time. What that means is any of our legendary creatures' abilities that don't have a colon in them are going to trigger additionally. I guess we have some replacement effects too. So let's look at some options for this. Some examples. What do we have here? So a triggered ability would be something like Spider-Man Brooklyn Visionary. Triggered abilities are abilities that begin with the words when, whenever, or at. Any ability that begins with one of those words is a triggered ability. So if we had Annie Joins Up in play, and then we played Spider-Man Brooklyn Visionary, this ability would trigger twice, and we'd be able to search for a basic land, put it on the battlefield tapped, and shuffle 2 times. Generally, if you tell someone, or you tell your pod, hey, I've got a Rampant Growth twice, they'll be like, yeah, you only have to shuffle once. So they'll let you search for 2 basic lands, put them on the battlefield tapped together, and then shuffle. That is a triggered ability, and Annie Joins Up would let you trigger it twice. When Rishkar enters, put a +1/+1 counter on each of up to 2 target creatures. That triggers twice. So we'd be able to get 2 different instances of a 1/1 counter on each of up to 2 target creatures. However, each creature you control with a counter has tap to add green mana, does not trigger twice because it doesn't trigger at all. It's an ability that does not begin with when, whenever, or at. so it's not a triggered ability. Just like abilities that say, here we go. Kami of Whispered Hopes. This ability is not triggered because it doesn't begin with win, whenever, or at. This ability is a replacement effect. This ability also doesn't begin with win, whenever, or at. It begins with a tap symbol and has a colon in it. Every ability in Magic that has a colon in it is an activated ability. On the left of the colon is the cost, on the right is the effect. In any case, Annie Joins Up doesn't double it because Annie Joins Up only cares about triggered abilities, which again, if it doesn't start with at, win, or whenever, it's not a triggered ability. Terrific Team Up is next. This is 3 and a green for an instant that says this spell costs 2 generic mana less to cast if you control a permanent with mana value 4 or greater. It doesn't say creature, it's a permanent, any of your permanents, including Annie Joins Up. It has mana value of 4, so it's mana value 4 or greater. And if so, Terrific Team Up only costs 1 and a green, because it costs 2 less. It says, 1 or 2 target creatures we control each get +1/+0 until end of turn, and then they each deal damage equal to their power to target creature an opponent controls. This is sort of like a combination of Kapow and Signature Slam. It's 2 of our creatures getting a little bit bigger until end of turn, and both of them dealing their power to a single creature an opponent controls. So it's not a fight, but it's also not a counter, and it's not all modified creatures, and so forth. So this is a nice, cheaper spell if we have a high mana value creature, because it's only 1 and a green, and it's at instant speed, which is pretty nice compared to Kapow. So yeah, we've seen Venom Blast, of course, 2 and double green to put 2 counters on a creature we control, and up to one other target creature will take damage equal to the power of what we put the counters on. And then of course, Waka can destroy artifacts when it does combat damage to a player. So all of these are ways that we can interact with our opponent's stuff. We are not running any Wraths in this deck, any spells that say destroy all creatures or exile all creatures, just because we are running a creature-heavy deck, and we want to be able to play our creatures and keep playing more creatures and have them work together without having to risk losing them all just because our opponent's board has also gotten big too. So into the supplemental categories. Here are the cards that we have that make tokens, just because it could be relevant for the kind of tokens we want to bring to the table to be ready and to see what additional creatures we're going to have in play. Origins of Spider-Man makes a 2/1 green spider creature token with reach. Twitching Doll, when we sacrifice it, makes a bunch of 2/2 green spider creature tokens with reach. Arachnogenesis makes 1/2 green spider tokens with reach. So we've seen the breadth of all the different kinds of spider tokens we can make. 2/1s, 2/2s, and 1/2s. Cranko makes 1/1 goblins. Arasta makes those 1/2 spiders with reach, same as Arachnogenesis. Masquid Nexus makes 2/2 blue shapeshifter creature tokens with Changeling, which of course, because they have Changeling, are spiders as well. And I guess they're also goblins. And Silk makes 1/1 green and white human citizen creature tokens. So all of these cards make tokens for us, one way or another, and can give us more of a board presence that way, even without our 33 creatures. We have a synergy section. Synergy are cards that work even better with the kind of things we're trying to do. Stocking the Pantry gets counters on it that we can use to draw cards whenever we put 1/1 counters on our creatures, which we're doing a lot of. Bard class gives us a lot of benefits to legendary creatures, which we have a lot of. Spider-Punk gives all of our spiders riot, which we have plenty of spiders. Kami of Whispered Hopes cares about counters and gains a lot of benefit from having counters put on it. Kutzil cares about our creatures being bigger than their base power, which of course comes from counters. Relic of Legends taps legendary creatures, which we have a lot of. Rishgar is a source of counters itself, but also gives our creatures with counters the ability to tap for mana. Supportive Parents lets us tap creatures for mana, which lets us have tapped creatures, so our web slinging is better. Annie Joins Up doubles the triggers of our legendary creatures' triggered abilities. Masquid Nexus makes everything we have a spider and can make little spider friends. Heroes Podium cares about our legendary creatures and pumps them all up based on how many additional legends we have. And of course, Hamza makes all of our creature spells cost less by 1 generic mana for every creature we have with any number of 1/1 counters on it. So that's our synergy section. We have a section of protection. These are some cards that we've mostly seen, but one new one. Spectacular Tactics can put a counter on one of our creatures, and it gains hexproof until end of turn. Spider-Punk makes it so damage can't be prevented and spells and abilities can't be countered. That seems pretty good. So, yeah, no one can prevent our damage. Arachnogenesis it does prevent damage, as long as, of course, Spider-Punk is not out, from combat damage, that is, from non-spider creatures whenever we cast this. Kutzil makes it so our opponents can't cast spells during our turn. And finally, we have, from the Lord of the Rings Commander decks, Taunt from the Rampart. 3, a red and a white, for a sorcery that says, goad all creatures your opponents control until your next turn those creatures can't block. Goad means all of our opponent's creatures, until our next turn, they have to attack if they're able to, and they have to attack a player other than us if they're able to. So we probably don't want to play this if our... no, actually we could. In any case, if we have 3 opponents, all of their creatures have to attack if they're not otherwise prevented from it. Like, for example, maybe they can tap those creatures for mana before combat, so then they're tapped and they can't attack. But if they go into combat and their creatures are able to attack, they have to attack, and they have to attack someone other than us, if possible. If we're down to just one opponent and we cast Taunt from the Rampart, it still might be worth it, because until our next turn, none of our opponent's creatures can block. So in that situation, we would probably want to cast Taunt from the Rampart if we know our opponent can't kill us with their creatures on the crackback. Or more importantly, if we say to them, if we look at their life total and say, we can do that much damage with our creatures as long as they don't block, then we just cast Taunt from the Rampart and they can't. Even if they do, even if we do have multiple creatures or multiple opponents in play, multiple opponents in the game, goading all of their creatures, they wouldn't be able to block anyway because they're attacking, but Taunt from the Rampart means that they can't. So that means that we cast this pre-combat, we attack whoever we want to, we do unblockable damage, and we're not going to get any retribution for it in the form of combat because all of our opponent's creatures are goaded and they have to attack someone other than us. That is our protection section. Let's look at Evasion. These are 4 cards that give our creatures evasion. Garruk's Uprising gives them trample. Bright Palm makes our creatures, or makes a creature that is attacking, when Bright Palm attacks, we double the number of 1/1 counters on a target creature, and that creature can't be blocked by creature's power 2 or less, a little bit of evasion. Spider-Man, when we cast creature spells, we put a 1/1 counter on a target creature, which will gain flying until end of turn. And then Spider-Man Miles Morales, when it enters or attacks, we put 1/1 counters on each other creature we control. All of those creatures will get trample until end of turn. So trample is good evasion, flying is good evasion, and can't be blocked by creatures with power 2 or less is not bad evasion either. If we have an opponent with a tokens deck, that might be all their creatures. Finally, we have a section called Finishers. We've got a couple of cards we haven't seen yet. Finishers in this deck are cards that are meant to end the game for us somehow, or at least kill off one of our opponents. Taunt from the Rampart is a great one for that, because it means our opponents are going to be taking a bunch of damage from each other, and we can swing in and not worry about being blocked. We also have Double Trouble. For 4 and a red, it's an instant that doubles the power of each creature we control until end of turn. This does not put extra counters on it, it just takes the number that is the power printed on that creature plus the 1/1 counters on it, its total power, and just doubles that number until end of turn. So if we're attacking with a 3/3 creature that has 2 1/1 counters on it, then we're attacking with a 5/5 creature. We cast Double Trouble, we're now attacking with a 10/5 creature. So this could absolutely kill our opponents, especially if it's happening in the form of commander damage from our commander Miles Morales. In addition, we have Unnatural Growth. For 1 and quadruple green, so a little bit restrictive, but green is our biggest color in this deck, we have an enchantment that says at the beginning of each combat, double the power and toughness of each creature you control until end of turn. That means all of our creatures have their normal power and toughness, whatever's printed on them plus their counters, until combat on every turn, at which point we have this triggered ability that doubles our creature's power and toughness, and that'll last until the end of turn. So this may not kill all of our opponents right away, but it's probably going to keep them from hurting us, because our creatures are huge when they try to attack, and make our creatures very threatening when we attack with them. Unnatural growth is very strong, and I'm surprised to see it at the price it's at. So that covers all of the spells in our deck. We're going to go over our land base right now. So we're running 17 basic lands, 10 basic forests, 5 basic plains, and only 2 basic mountains, just because our distribution of our colors is like this. 63 of our spells are green. Only 63% of our spells. Only 19 are red. And if you're worried or wondering, here is our mana curve. So I tried to make sure that our ability to produce those colors of mana is represented appropriately, and we have a couple of different ways to find basic lands in our deck and rampant growth them out. So this is a pretty good balance that has worked for me when I've been playing this deck. Next up, we have the 3 bounce lands on our colors. Bounce lands, these all work the same way, but they produce different colors of mana. We'll use Boros Garrison as an example. This is a land that comes in tapped, and when it enters, we have to return a land we control to its owner's hand. That means we bounce it. So this land comes in tapped, so we can't tap it for mana the first turn, and we have to get rid of a land in play and put it back in our hand. We can do that on a tap land, or a tapped land. So maybe we tap a forest for mana, and then play Boros Garrison and return that tapped forest to our hand. So we didn't lose out on its mana this turn. The reason we might want to do that is because Boros Garrison, when it's tapped, it makes 2 mana, a red and a white. That's true for all of these lands. Gruul Turf makes a red and a green, Selesnya Sanctuary makes a green and a white. So we have all 3 of our 2 color combinations represented. The great pattern for this, the reason this is such a great land, is let's say we play a forest. Let's say it's not the first turn of the game, just to make it simple, but we just have played a forest. Next turn, we tap the forest for mana, use that mana, and play Selesnya Sanctuary. It comes in tapped, and we bounce that forest. The next turn, because we have a forest in hand, we definitely make our land drop, because we have a forest in hand. It's a land that we might not have drawn otherwise. We play that, and now since it's untapped, and so is Selesnya Sanctuary, that's 3 total mana we can make, which it's been 3 turns. We only have 2 lands in play for it, but we're not missing out on any of the mana we would have gotten for 3 land drops on those turns. It's the ability to have the same amount of mana as playing a land per turn without needing a land per turn. You only need the basic land and one of your bounce lands. So it's very helpful in hitting our land drops and making sure that we stay consistent, even though it does work a little bit slowly. So we've got our 3 bounce lands. Next, we're running 8 fixing lands. These are lands that are meant to fix our mana in various ways. Command Tower is Arcane Signet on a land, if you want to think of it that way. It's a land that comes in untapped and taps for any 1 mana of the colors in our commander's color identity. So this taps for red, white, or green, and it comes in untapped. It's perfect. We also have Path of Ancestry, which is almost the same thing, but it comes in tapped. That's great. It taps for all of our colors, but it comes in tapped. That's fine with me. Tap to add 1 mana of any color in your commander's color identity. But wait, there's more. If we use that mana to cast a creature spell that shares a creature type with our commander, we scry 1. So what is our commander's creature types? Well, they're human, citizen, and hero. We have, in this deck, 18 humans, including Miles. We have 2 citizens, including Miles. And we have 10 heroes, including Miles. So what is that? Is that 27 cards beyond Miles that Path of Ancestry will work with? It is. So we can get a lot of scries out of Path of Ancestry's mana. In addition, if we just so happen to have our Maskwood Nexus in play, then all of our creatures have the same types as our commander. Not just because they have those types, but because our commander has all types, if he's in play. So with Masquerade Nexus out, Path of Ancestry is always going to let us have a scry if we use its mana to cast a creature spell. Next we have Exotic Orchard, which is Felwar Stone on a land. It taps for 1 mana of any color a land an opponent controls could produce. So if our opponents have some forests out and nothing else that can produce white or green mana, then, white or red mana, then Exotic Orchard only produces green. But it comes in untapped, and the more colors our opponents play, the more we're able to make. That will hopefully be white, red, or green like we need. Next up is Temple of the False God. Temple of the False God, some people think this is not that great of a land. I think it's wonderful, and it's perfect for this kind of deck. So Temple of the False God comes in untapped, and it taps for 2 colorless mana. So it's like the bounce lands, it taps for 2 mana. However, we can only activate it if we control 5 or more lands, which is to say 4 lands in addition to Temple of the False God, because it counts itself. So this is not a terrific land for us to have in our opening hand necessarily, unless we maybe have 4 other lands. But once we have 4 lands beyond Temple of the False God, it's a land that taps for 2, which is Acceleration. This is a soul ring on a land, in a way. People call this a soul land. So even though it has a pretty significant restriction, that restriction comes into play less than it doesn't. If that makes sense. This is more useful. It's useful more of the time than it's unuseful. So yeah, Temple of the False God, very solid in this deck. Finally, we have 4 soft fetch lands. We're going to go through them individually. Vibrant Cityscape is the land Evolving Wilds, or Terramorphic Expanse, printed for Spider-Man. It's a land. It does not tap for mana, but you can tap it and sacrifice it to search for a basic land, put it on the battlefield tapped, and shuffle, which is Rampant Growth. So finding any of the basics that we need, if maybe we're looking for our red sources because we only have 2 of those mountains, which don't worry about it. We get a lot more red than you would think with just 2 basic mountains in it. But maybe we need one. So we play the Vibrant Cityscape, tap it, sacrifice it, and find one of our mountains. It comes in tapped, and we've got it available for next turn. Cabaret Courtyard is almost the same thing, except rather than us having to tap it and sacrifice it, when it enters, we automatically sacrifice it. It just does it by itself. And when we do, we Rampant Growth for a mountain, forest, or plains. We search for it, put it on the battlefield tapped, and shuffle. And then we even gain a life. So the reason we gain an extra life on top of this is because it automatically sacrifices itself. Vibrant Cityscape we can sacrifice whenever we want to, which means we can shuffle our library whenever we want to. Sometimes it gains a little bit of an advantage in different play patterns. In this deck, typically, it doesn't matter to us. So Cabaret Courtyard and Vibrant Cityscape are doing the same thing. We have Sheltering Landscape as well. This one comes in untapped, and it can tap for colorless, or we can sacrifice it by tapping. We can tap and sacrifice it to Rampant Growth for a mountain, forest, or plains. So even better this is than our Vibrant Cityscape, because it can tap for mana on its own. In addition, Sheltering Landscape has an ability called Cycling for a red, a green, and a white, which means while it is in our hand, if we pay a red, a green, and a white, and we discard it, we can draw a card. Maybe it's late in the game, and we draw this, and we have plenty of mana, and we just don't need this, so we can pay 3 of our mana and throw this away to draw something different. Pretty great. Last of all these is Myriad Landscape. Myriad Landscape enters tapped, and it taps for colorless mana. Or we can pay, or in addition, we can pay 2, tap it, and sacrifice it to search our library for up to 2 basic land cards that share a land type. Then we put them on the battlefield tapped and shuffle. So this is sort of like a double Rampant Growth. We get to find 2 basic lands. They just have to be the same type. So both of our mountains, 2 of our plains, or 2 of our forests. Even though this comes in tapped, and it requires us to sacrifice it and tap it and pay 2 in order to do this, Myriad Landscape is 1 land that can turn into 2. So that's ramp for us, right here in our land base. Next, we have our Scry lands. These are the 3 temples: Temple of Abandon, Temple of Plenty, and Temple of Triumph. They are all the same except for their colors. The way they work is they are lands that enter tapped, and when they do, we scry one. We just get a free scry when they first come in, and then they will tap for 2 of our colors. Temple of Vandon taps for red and green, Temple of Plenty for green and white, and Temple of Triumph for red and white. We also have a Tri-land, which is Jungle Shrine. It enters tapped, and it taps for 1 mana of any of the colors in our color identity. So this is just a worse command tower or a worse Path of Ancestry. It's sort of our 3rd command tower, if you want to think of it that way. Pretty nice. Finally, we are running 6 utility lands. These are lands that are good for us in different ways. Some of them still make mana. In fact, all of them do. But they will do something else for us. Demolition Field is the first one. Demolition Field comes in untapped and taps for colorless, but we can also pay 2 and tap it and sacrifice it to destroy a non-basic land our opponent controls. Now, maybe you have heard, in Commander, land destruction is kind of frowned upon. Generally, the rule is mass land destruction is frowned upon. Targeted land destruction like this, the people who have a problem with that are people who haven't faced other players who are running really problematic lands. There's a 30 some odd years of history to Magic, and some of these lands are really dangerous. For example, we have Rogue's Passage, which I'll talk about in a moment, or Kessig Wolf Run, or Gavany Township. These are all good lands that are going to help our strategy, our game plan. It may be that if our opponent is running one of those types of lands, we need to get rid of it, and it's fair to do so. So what Demolition Field does is, if we pay 2, tap and sack it, we blow up their land, but then they get to look for a basic land and put it on the battlefield untapped and shuffle. So it's better than Rampant Growth. And then once they've done that, we get to as well. What that means is neither of us are actually down a land. We're just both down a non-basic land, something that was dangerous for us or for the table on our opponent's board, and for us, the Demolition Field. We've just turned them both into basic lands. This is fine. Next up is Gavany Township. Gavany Township comes in untapped and taps for colorless. We can also pay 2, a green and a white, and tap it to put a 1/1 counter on each creature we control. This is really excellent for our deck, because if we've got 4 mana and Gavany Township available to us, we can pump up all of our creatures all at once, and we're probably going to want to a bunch of times, because all of our counters give us so much value in this deck. Kessig Wolf Run is also good. It comes in untapped, taps for colorless, or we can pay X, a red and a green, and tap it to give one of our creatures plus X plus O and trample until end of turn. So maybe we want to take Miles Morales, his backside, Ultimate Spider-Man, sorry, and really hit with a lot of commander damage. Maybe he's got a bunch of counters on him, but we really need to get in there. So we pump as much mana as we can, plus a red and a green, and tapping Kessig Wolf Run into this, and give him a huge power bonus and trample. So even if they block him, he's going to be able to trample over and do a lot of commander damage to our opponent. Or we can do this with any of our creatures. It's just a nice way to have a little bit of a pump spell built into one of our lands. Next up is Mosswort Bridge. This is, like Fight Rigging, a hideaway card. So when it comes in, we will hide away 4. So we look at the top 4, we exile one face down under Mosswort Bridge, put the other ones on the bottom in a random order. Now Mosswort Bridge enters tapped, but it does tap for green. And for a green and tapping it, we can play the exiled card without paying its mana cost, if we have at least 10 power among the creatures we have on the battlefield. So once our creature count, or our creature's total power is quite high, anytime we want to, at instant speed, we just pay a green, tap Mosswort Bridge, and we can cast the exiled card. Seems pretty good. Next, this is one of our slightly more expensive cards in the deck, but it's absolutely worth it for as many legends as we're running. Plaza of Heroes is a land that comes in untapped, taps for colorless, or it taps for 1 mana of any color as long as we only use that mana on a legendary spell, or it taps for 1 mana of any color among legendary permanents we control. So if we have the backside of our commander face up, then Plaza of Heroes is better than Command Tower. It can tap for any of the 3 colors we want, or colorless. And for 3 and tap and exile Plaza of Heroes, we can give target legendary creature hexproof and indestructible until end of turn. So this is the reason I've put this card in our utilities section for lands rather than our fixing lands section, just because it can protect one of our creatures, maybe our commander, if we really need it to. I do want to make mention, however, of this ability. Add 1 mana of any color among legendary permanents you control. Let's pretend we have our commander out and no other legendary permanents out. If Miles is face up, Miles is a green card. His color identity is red, green, white, but his color is defined just by what's in his casting cost. He has nothing else to define his color. So Miles is green. But if we have Ultimate Spider-Man face up, Ultimate Spider-Man is red, green, and white. So assuming that we are not casting a legendary spell with Plaza of Heroes, and we only have Miles Morales, this face up, in play, we have no other legendary creatures in play, then Plaza of Heroes can tap for green that we can use for anything, because that's the only color we have among legendary permanents we control. It can't tap for red or white for any spells that aren't themselves legendary with its other ability. So yeah, Plaza of Heroes, if we only have one color among legendary permanents we control, Plaza of Heroes' third ability can only tap for that mana, for those can only tap for mana of those colors. But again, if we're trying to cast a legendary spell, we can use this ability to tap for a mana of any color on the legendary spell. Finally, we have Rogue's Passage. Rogue's Passage is great in this deck, especially because we can have a bunch of creatures that are getting big and we want to get in and do damage with them. It comes in untapped, it taps for colorless, or we can pay 4 and tap it to make one of our creatures unblockable this turn. It does say target creature, so we can do this for an opponent's creature. Maybe we say, look, I know you're trying to kill, opponent B. I will make your big creature unblockable as long as you don't come at me next turn. Make your deals, because sometimes they work out for you. But it's more likely that we're going to be using it for our creatures. And it's a good idea to do so, because we're a creature-based deck, and we're here to win through combat damage. That sums it up. Again, I'm releasing new Spider-Man Commander decks every Thursday through mid-November when the Avatar set drops. So let me know in the comments if you'd like to see a specific commander or a deck style, and I'll build it. Thanks for watching, everyone. Make sure to like and subscribe, and remember, magic is fun. You should play more Magic.